Hi, my name is Elisa Barrett. I'm the Executive Director of the Western Justice Center. My pronouns are she, her, hers. The mission of the Western Justice Center is to empower people to strengthen their communities by helping them develop conflict resolution capacity, focusing on youth, educators, schools, and community partners. We are proud to host this open forum today on LA County's post-election landscape with a focus on youth justice. Before we start, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors today, the Los Angeles County Human Relations Commission and the LA versus Hate campaign, the Los Angeles City Civil and Human Rights Department, Pasadena Media's Arroyo channel, from which we're broadcasting live, and Arts Bridge the Gap. Also, before we begin, it is important to say that to understand the obstacles our nation faces in living up to the ideals set by our founders, we must start by acknowledging how our nation was built, through the terrorism of slavery and the claiming of land from Indigenous people. We therefore acknowledge that Pasadena exists on land that was the historic home of the Tongva people. We honor their lives and their land. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for agreeing to join us today. We're going to partake in something that has become altogether too rare in American civic life, a discussion about deeply important policy issues in which we will hear from a whole range of views. On some points we may agree, on others we may not. That is okay. In fact, it is natural and healthy. At the Western Justice Center, we do not regard conflict as something to be avoided. Rather, we regard conflict as growth trying to happen, as the potential for transformation calling us to the table. At the table today, we have three important leaders of our Los Angeles County community, and I thank all of you for joining us today. First, I'd like to introduce Judge Songhai Armstead. Judge Armstead is the inaugural Executive Director of the Los Angeles County Alternatives to Incarceration Initiative. She oversees implementation of recommendations to make care first, jails last, as a reality in LA County, coordinating multiple departments and community stakeholders. Judge Armstead comes to her role at ATI after a long career in the justice system, including serving these last 5 years as a judge on the Los Angeles County Superior Court. As a judge, she was instrumental in creating innovative programs to assist justice-involved veterans, people experiencing homelessness, and those with mental health and substance abuse disorders, as well as former gang youth, all with a focus on getting people the treatment and resources they need to improve their lives and break the cycle of incarceration. Judge Armstead, we are so excited to have you here with us today. Our second panelist is Supervisor Catherine Barger. Supervisor Barger is the chair this year of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors and serves the residents of the 5th Supervisorial District. It is the county's largest district, spanning 2,800 square miles, including 22 cities and 70 unincorporated communities in the Antelope, San Gabriel, San Fernando, Crescenta, and Santa Clarita Valleys. Supervisor Barger was born and raised in the 5th District and comes from a family with deep roots in public service. She has served as supervisor since 2016. Before that, she was chief of staff for Supervisor Antonovich. In that role, she served as chief policy advisor on health, mental health, social services, and children's issues. Supervisor Barger, it is a pleasure to have you with us today. And last, but certainly not least, we are joined by David C. Turner III, an activist scholar from Inglewood, California. As manager of the Brothers Son Selves Coalition, Mr. Turner leads a group of 10 community-based organizations working to end the school-to-prison pipeline and to decriminalize communities of color. Mr. Turner teaches at the collegiate level, including classes on hip-hop, research methods, education, and comparative ethnic studies. He has been featured in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and NBC BLK, and the New York Times for his activism. Mr. Turner received his BA in Africana Studies from CSU Dominguez Hills and his MS in Education and Higher Education from the University of Pennsylvania. He is currently a 5th-year doctoral candidate in the Social and Cultural Studies and Education program at UC Berkeley, where his research focuses on youth-based social movements, political identity, and resistance to the prison regime. We are so glad to have all of you here today. I'm going to set a little context for our work, and then we'll get started. This November, Californians faced a wide range of ballot measures, local and statewide. They were designed to increase resources for schools, empower youth, and reform our criminal justice system. The results were a mixed bag. Voters chose to restore voting rights for former felons, rejected efforts to reinstate harsher criminal sentencing standards, and sent the legislature board for another stab at money bail reform. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles County, voters passed LA County's Reimagine LA Charter Amendment, Measure J, which will guarantee a 10% baseline threshold of locally generated flexible revenue for housing, diversion, youth programming, and wellness. LA County Supervisors Sheila Kuehl and Hilda Solis have co-authored a motion to establish a 17-member Reimagine LA Advisory Committee comprised of county department leaders, people impacted by the justice system, labor representatives, and community-based organizations. One of the 5 key areas of community investment will be in youth development programs. The passage of Measure J follows on the heels of 2 other major developments that have the potential to make a significant impact on youth in our region. One of those is the creation of the LA County Agency Alternatives to Incarceration Initiative. Its mission is to transform the way Los Angeles treats its most vulnerable community members by placing care first and jails last. The working group that preceded the establishment of the initiative created a framework for using the criminal justice, health, social services, and community-based systems to prevent people from becoming enmeshed in the criminal justice system. The framework focuses on prevention, crisis response, diversion, and reentry support. If successful, the initiative could serve as a national model for addressing the systemic impacts of racism and mass incarceration. The other development that's very important and that David was deeply involved in this summer, so I'm hoping he'll talk about it, is a decision by the LAUSD School Board to cut $25 million out of its $70 million contract with LAPD to reduce the size of on-campus police presence by 1/3. The savings will be reinvested in hiring counselors, social workers, and other staff that support students with an emphasis on serving students of color. Student activists played a significant role in the LAUSD's decision, including youth leaders trained and supported by the Brothers Sun Selves Coalition. It is against this backdrop that we begin today's discussion. I'd like to start with Judge Armstead. Judge Armstead, throughout your career, you have dedicated your time to getting people treatment and resources they need to improve their lives and break the cycle of incarceration. Now, you lead the groundbreaking Alternatives to Incarceration initiative. Would you please tell us about ATI, what it's designed to accomplish, and share with us some of the impacts you're hoping the initiative will have in terms of reducing the number of incarcerated youth in LA County and in disrupting the school to prison pipeline?
Great. Thank you very much for that. ATI was spurred. I'm looking in different places, just so you know. I'm not used to being live, and I have cameras here, but the screens are here, so I'm going back and forth looking. But anyway, the ATI initiative was spurred by the recognition both inside and outside of government that jails and law enforcement are used as a default system for people with unmet needs, whether mental health, substance disorders, or other challenges that ought to be met with social services or a care first response. The 5 overarching strategies and several recommendations that basically came from the ATI work group creates kind of a roadmap of what we're looking at and a blueprint that my office has been using to sort of expand and develop programs in line with the board's vision around a care first, jail last vision. And so in many ways, our goal with ATI is to not just reduce incarceration and detention, but to reduce or eliminate contact with the justice system whenever it's possible, particularly when it's clear that the contact arises from some other unmet need. We believe there are far better resources and systems in the county suited to engage, and actually cheaper in many instances, to engage with youth and particular address the challenges that they may be facing other than the justice system. Contact with the justice system at a young age can have lifelong impact. And we also know when we look at the youth brain, sometimes it's 25 to 26 years old, depending on if they've experienced trauma or substance use before the brain is fully developed. And so, incarceration and the justice system is not the right answer. As ATI helps to coordinate and develop policies, streamline resources, and expand practices focused on moving individuals away from justice systems, it's also building upon and expanding other youth initiatives that started in the county that predated ATI. One is the Youth Diversion and Development unit, that's YDD. YDD was established after a year-long community-driven planning process that recommended the creation of a unit in the county aimed at diverting youth at the earliest possible contact point from the justice system. YDD has been in existence for about 2 years now, and it aims to provide pre-arrest diversion services to youth countywide. Black and brown youth account for 86% of all arrests in the county, while Black youth are about 7% of the population and account for about 24% of the youth that are arrested. Removing youth from the justice system at the onset sharply reduces the likelihood that they will ever be incarcerated, including later in life. Also in August of 2019, the board took a monumental step forward by disrupting the school to prison pipeline by establishing a youth justice work group and charged it with developing recommendations around a reimagined youth justice system. The work group's report was recently provided to the board, and that report recommends transitioning the youth section of the probation department into a new department of youth development. It also recommends use of alternative facilities for youth who must be removed from their homes and call on the county to re-examine the use of camps and other carceral settings, especially given the geographical challenge that is present for youth and their families. Most probation camps, as we know, are out in Malibu or far outside of sides of Antelope Valley and near Angeles Forest, National Forest, when many of the youth are coming from South LA, East LA, and Long Beach. ATI will provide coordinating support on this effort as the board evaluates the recommendations and decides a path forward. As you mentioned earlier, Measure J specifically calls out youth development as an area to be funded. To ensure youth voices are included, individuals with lived experience in the youth justice system will be included in the Reimagine LA Advisory Committee, and we're also including youth voices on the ATI Community Cabinet that we just started convening. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Judge Armstead. That is a wonderful, comprehensive overview. We're so grateful. I want to go next to Supervisor Barger. Supervisor Barger, when you began your year in 2020 as chair of the County Board of Supervisors, you announced that your priority would be youth development. During this time of economic crisis, you've been a strong advocate with Governor Newsom and with State School Superintendent Tony Thurmond to pressure for additional resources for students impacted by distance learning, with special consideration for those students who are most vulnerable, including students who have special needs, are low income, English learners, youth who are experiencing homelessness, and foster youth. Along with LA County CEO Sachi Hamai, you also opposed Measure J out of concern that our charter amendment would reduce the board's ability to respond flexibly and develop a sound budget during an economic crisis. Would you please tell us what you've been most proud to achieve in terms of supporting youth in LA County this year, and what you are hoping the Reimagine LA Advisory Committee will keep in mind as it begins its work?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And actually, I was taking notes as the judge was talking because I'm very excited to be a part of a board that is really looking at how we are going to change the way we have done things in LA County as it relates to our youth. When I announced the theme for my year as chair, I never could have imagined what we'd be facing now. I don't think anyone could imagine where we would be today. The context has certainly changed, but the focus on serving youth for me and for the entire board has not. There are a few things that I'm proud of this year. We as a board utilize CARE Acts, which is our federal funding, to buy computers, hotspots, and other devices for kids across the county, targeting areas that we knew had the greatest need. Roughly $20 million was spent countywide on 50,000 devices with free internet for youth to learn virtually. My biggest concern was that we would not be able to provide the resources to individuals who were going to be disenfranchised, especially when it comes to their education. We are creating new programs in my district for youth attending schools in the Antelope Valley to encourage them to pursue human services careers such as child welfare, social welfare, teaching, therapy, and more. So we are investing resources in an area where a lot of the kids are coming, what they call down below, but we want to keep them in the community and have them invest in their community. So as a result, we're working with aerospace industry partners in the Antelope Valley to hire more than 500 residents this year alone. And that is from every age group. So not everyone is meant to go to college. So we want them to know that there are opportunities and training available for them to go and get good paying jobs in the community that they come from. It really is, to me, about creating a career pipeline that suits the needs of each individual region. In an area that has been historically underserved, which the Antelope Valley has, I'm proud to be working with our local partners to find community-based solutions. In terms of Measure J, I've told people that I was not supportive of the change, not because of the content of what it was going to do, but because of the procedural concerns that I had as it relates to providing a budget each and every year. But I listened to the voters. They have spoken. It passed by a large majority, and I am committed to implementing the will of the people. I believe that it has never been an either or. It's about investing in our youth. The board will nominate appointees to the Reimagine LA Advisory Committee next month, and then it really is time for us to roll up our sleeves and get to work. One item I would like to highlight for the committee is a Challenger transformation project in Lancaster. Challenger was one of our largest probation camps in LA County. We want to transform that. We have 65 acres of land available to reimagine our efforts in northern Los Angeles County. The board approved my motion to close the facility for use as a probation camp and really rethink how we can use it to benefit our youth. We are actively working to repurpose it to serve as a restorative care village for the Antelope Valley. We will offer wraparound services, housing, career training, and access to higher education. This will be a one-stop shop for programs and services in the Antelope Valley, but it's not going to be exclusively for those from the Antelope Valley. We want it to be something that is a destination where people realize they are going to have opportunity. The distribution of Measure J funds are meant to create equality and equity throughout the county. This region has many of our high-risk, high-need youth. And I am really looking forward to the many successes through the Reimagine LA Advisory Committee. And I personally will be working with them to ensure we hit the ground running and we are focused on those efforts. So with that, again, thank you. This is an opportunity. Being with the county for 30 years, I view this as long overdue. And I think that in the end, the next generation is going to benefit by what we put in place today. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Yes, I've been following some of the reports from our city controller in LA, Ron Galperin, who did an analysis of impact on health outcomes and economic outcomes. And it was very apparent to me that the two areas where communities of color were actually most impacted were both South LA and the San Gabriel and Antelope Valley. So thank you for drawing attention to that work in the Antelope Valley. I'd like to go now to Mr. Turner. David, the Brother Son Selves Coalition has as its mission ending the criminalization of young boys and men of color by creating and influencing policy that invests in young people and their future. The coalition has a long track record of empowering youth and working with them to advocate for reform in the way that students are disciplined in our schools and in the way that the police are present in communities of color. The coalition helped pass LAUSD's School Climate Bill of Rights and is also working to stop students who are cited for willful defiance or disruption from being suspended from school. Would you please tell us a little bit about the coalition's work to develop and empower youth leaders and how those efforts translated into the enormous impact that student activists were able to have with LAUSD this past summer?
All right. Thank you so much for that question, and thank you for having me. First, I would be remiss if I didn't give a huge shout out to our partners, right? So our partners within the Brother Son Selves Coalition, you have Community Coalition, Inner City Struggle, Labor Community Strategy Center, Genders and Sexualities Alliance Network, Brotherhood Crusade, Social Justice Funding to Combine Girls in Action, the East LA YMCA, and I think one of our powerhouses, especially at the county level, is the Youth Justice Coalition. So definitely want to give a big shout out to them, and also going to give a shout out in particular, right, to our partners at the LAUSD level, right, with Cadre, UTLA, and Students Deserve, right, who we work with to make the budget amendment happen. So first, I think one of the things that's important about working with young people and working with young people to build power is listening to young people and understanding what their issues are. Right. So for the School Climate Bill of Rights, one of the things that made that particular intervention so important was that our young people were being criminalized on campus for things that, quite frankly, they shouldn't be. Right. So imagine I'm sitting in here in front of you right now. I'm wearing a hat. A young person, could be suspended for that, for days even. And even though we're having this dialogue, right, and I'm still paying attention and competent, right, young people would be suspended for that. And that in and of itself is a problem, right? So, and we also know that that particular policy was directly impacting Black and brown students the most, especially boys. So what the whole impetus behind the School Climate Bill of Rights was that young people don't necessarily need to be pushed out of school, especially for things that could require, restorative justice or require alternatives, right, to hard school discipline. So that is what the School Climate Bill of Rights was primarily for. Since that time, we've worked with organizations across the state to pass state legislation, right, to in willful defiance at the state level, which include AB 420 and then SB 419, which passed last year, which ended willful defiance school suspension for grades K through 8. And this summer, we worked with Students Deserve, Cadre, the UTLA, and also all of our partners in our coalition, right, and Black Lives Matter Los Angeles for the school police budget cut. I think one of the things, especially here in Los Angeles, when the crack epidemic happened, when we were experiencing an influx of drugs in our communities, right, there was a law enforcement response. And that law enforcement response not only impacted LAPD or the LA County Sheriffs, it also impacted schools, right? I think it was said earlier that there was a contract with LAPD. No, the Los Angeles Unified School Police have their own department. That, quite frankly, has a larger budget than most cities, right? With 400 employees, right? Or 400 plus employees. So, with that being said, right, like, how is it that, we have a school police department where, there are over 20,000 students who go to a school with a police officer and no nurse, right? Or a police officer and no counselor, right? So with that being said, our work was, okay, we need to reallocate these funds. We need to reallocate these resources so that we can put them in places where they need to be, especially now in the middle of a global health pandemic, when we know that our young people need so much more support emotionally, so much more support mentally, right, in order to succeed, right, in school. So for us, it was a budget amendment, but it was also a reflection of our values, right? So if we really want to make Black Lives Matter in schools, you really want to believe this idea that young people matter, right, then we're going to make the investment in that. And it is going to be a hard decision, but I think it's going to be the right decision. I think, quite frankly, we also see that at the county level with the passing of Measure J, right? Again, that Measure J, as it started, right, as a reimagined LA initiative, right, it wasn't very popular. But again, the will of the people made it so. Right. So you have all of these people from all different facets of LA County coming together to support this particular initiative. Young people in our coalition supported the initiative. So I think with that being said, as we're talking about youth empowerment, as we're talking about what that looks like, I think it's important for us to center the needs and the experiences of our young people and continue to do our work from there.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate your setting all of that context for us, and thank you for the work of the coalition. I wanted to go back, looking at the work group for the alternatives to incarceration, talked about a series of interventions that can occur in the course of a person's life that can be used to prevent them from becoming enmeshed in the criminal justice system. And Judge Armstead, you talked about that in your response to the opening question. Specifically focusing on youth, and this is a question for any of our panelists, what are the most critical points of intervention that we need to be focused on?
While there is, right, like when you think about interacting with the justice system, think about it as a continuum where you have the initial contact with law enforcement all the way through to if that person is ultimately incarcerated, and then upon being released, you have state supervision, right, through probation or something of that nature, right? So if you think about it as a continuum, right, the point in intervention is you want to do what you can to prevent the initial contact with law enforcement in the first place, right? So, so while we are thinking about this idea of intervention, right, like, yeah, you can intervene in that continuum, right? I think that's what tools like diversion do, right? Where somebody does have that initial contact, and instead of going down that pipeline, they're instead diverted to community-based resources. That is an important piece, and I think that's a critical piece to ensuring that we can continue to move people away from the justice system. But I'm of the mindset that if our young people have the right resources, they don't come into contact with law enforcement at all, right? And that looks like making sure that young people have jobs. Right, that looks like making sure that young people have access to the college resources that they need. In the survey that our Brother Son Cells Coalition conducted back in 2019, we surveyed over 3,300 young people, and 90% plus or more wanted investment in jobs, wanted investment in college resources, wanted investment in the things that, quite frankly, right, would prevent them from ever coming into contact with law enforcement in the first place. I think second, one of the things that we might have to think about is how do we change some of the rules around how law enforcement engages communities of color, right? When we think about what happened with Dejan Kizee in South Central Los Angeles, right? Dejan Kizee was riding his bike and, ended up dead, right? We think about what happened with Andres Guardado, right? And, how he was at work, right? When he was killed by law enforcement. I think, there are some challenges with how law enforcement interacts with our communities. So as much as we're also talking about putting some resources on the front end to prevent that interaction in the first place, another thing we may need to do or may need to think about is how do we change the ways in which law enforcement interacts with communities, or maybe even engages communities, right, in a way where they're not necessarily needed, and we could prevent, right, those very preventable deaths, right? Because I liken how preventable the deaths are to law enforcement to how preventable some of the deaths have been with COVID, right? Like, these are things that are very preventable that we can stop from happening if we have the political will to make it so.
Great, thank you. Supervisor Barger.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with what David said about preventing them from even coming in contact with the justice system. And that's why, when I started 30 years ago, we saw a parallel between those in our foster system and those that ended up in our probation system. So we knew something was going on where they're going from foster to probation. We have the ability to invest the resources early on so they don't come in contact with the justice system. But taking it a step further, when they do come in contact with the justice system, I don't want that to become a life sentence where it is a scarlet letter. I believe that we have an opportunity to use it to our advantage, to be a positive, to really invest in jobs, job training. We've got the most incredible unions here who have apprenticeship programs that want to invest the time and resources in our youth. They just want to be pointed in the right direction so they can do it and invest in that community. So, I believe that early intervention is key. And it's something that, whether it be with our foster youth or just in communities where we've seen a high number of youth ending up in our camps, we need to invest the resources. I look at the parents who are both working, or a single mother who's working and is not home. And it's very hard for them to be both a mother and a provider and hope that their child's not getting in trouble. We need to provide them with the resources and the support. And really, as a community, come together and recognize that these are all of our youth that we need to invest our time, but more importantly, in LA County, our money in providing services and support. So I agree, David, with what you said.
Can I add just a couple of things? I agree with both. When we look at, he mentioned school, behavioral problems or anything like that, or things that shouldn't even be labeled as behavioral problems that have been termed behavioral problems. So sometimes the answer is no intervention at all, right? Maybe sometimes that's the answer. Sometimes the answer is, is this because of something that's larger? And are we bringing in the right services to help support this family? I mean, really the thing that we're looking at with ATI and hopefully with Measure J, because I'm in the middle of both at the moment, is really looking at healthy communities and healthy families. And the thing that I've told everyone is that the county can only do so much. There's only so many resources, but it's going to take all of us being part of the larger, solving a larger problem. So where are ecumenical groups, where are our community-based organizations, and how can we expand their reach, and how can we all put a little bit to help and save the child, because that's our next generation, right? The other thing that I wanted to add is that already right now in ATI, we're trying to stand up, this is like day 45 for me on this new position, but we are already working on rolling out an EMT apprenticeship program that ran before, and we're doing it right now. We're working with both, I've asked probation and DCFS to let us know what kids do we have that have been in both systems that we can go ahead and put through this program. And although COVID has kind of given us a step back, but we also, we have tons of kids who were in fire camps, right? Who have already been trained, but why can't we go ahead and get them into forest fire, into our forest firefighting, and I've talked to the chief about that. So he's excited about doing that as well. And so, and they've already said they'll bring the facilities and they'll supply the personnel. We're going to go ahead and supply the stipends. And then we just need to make sure we can find housing for these kids while they're going through it if they don't have a home that they can be in. So those are the types of things that we're working on now, in addition to other apprenticeship programs. So that is really where I focus. And so what David said about, people win jobs, I think everyone wants a purpose, right? Like everyone has something that everyone has something that they can offer to the world, and it's being able to support them so they can step into that purpose and knowing that they all have something great to offer.
Judge Armstead, you mentioned that as a parallel to the Alternative to Incarceration Work Group, we've also had the LA County Youth Justice Work Group, which just issued its report, Youth Justice Reimagined. Among other things, the report draws attention to the way that in-school services can transform the course of a person's life. For example, the executive summary recommends that schools be supported by youth development workers who can respond to conflict, make sure harm is repaired, and mentor youth to help them grow. This is presented as an alternative to the current approach, which is having school-based probation officers conducting supervision, providing referrals, but where there's still a connection to that school to prison pipeline. So I'm curious to know for each of you, what role do you think things like peer mediation programs, conflict resolution education, restorative justice practices, how can or should they be playing a role in our efforts to support youth by what we've been talking about here is not having them connected to the justice system even in the first place?
You're speaking my other love language, right? So, I mean, so
I know it's so. I know it's so.
Yeah. So I am a mediator. I've taught mediation at UCLA and conflict resolution. I used to run one of the programs for the city of LA and created the bias policing mediation program for the city of LA. So this is my other love language. But it's extremely important. We know that dialogue and giving people safe space to work through challenges is very, very important. The degree to which behavioral issues can be handled in the school setting and without the involvement of law enforcement lessens the possibility of youth being arrested and entering into the justice system at all, right? And we know that once a young person enters the justice system, it's more likely that they will face challenges and roadblocks throughout their adult life. So we don't want to give people more challenges and stumbling blocks. We want to support them and knock down as many stumbling blocks and hurdles as we can. And we know that restorative justice efforts are part of YDD's programming, and the report recently provided that the board calls for the expansion of those efforts throughout the youth justice system.
Thank you, Judge Armstead. Yes, conflict resolution is part of my love language as well. And, we're also, as an organization, that is the work of the Western Justice Center, is to empower youth to be resolving conflicts without often needing to involve adults, without needing to involve school discipline, without needing to involve the justice system. And one of the things that we're working on now is also a jobs track, right? So where students who are leaders in peer mediation can have paid opportunities during the summer to begin to explore careers in mediation. I'm wondering, Supervisor Barger or Mr. Turner, do you have anything to add on this issue before we open up?
I just have to say that when you talk about the youth and being given opportunities, when you talk about the fire program, one of the barriers was the fact that they had come in contact with the justice system. So under current guidelines, they would not qualify for those jobs. We are breaking that barrier down and getting rid of that, because the reality is they're probably better than some of the firefighters that we're going to have that are currently online. And they are determined and well-trained, and it's an incredible opportunity. And so I completely agree with the fact that we have opportunities to change the way we even hire within the county to allow people to get that second chance. But I truly do believe early prevention strategies need to be prioritized in the culture of our school campuses. These efforts not only disrupt the pipeline, but they create better communities with more thoughtful youth becoming more thoughtful adults. A question the coalition will pose, in terms of where we are going and how are we going to do this. I think that's where the challenge is going to come down. On paper, it sounds good, but now we have to put it into practice. We have to break down those barriers, and we need to show what we can do and what we are going to do moving forward.
Yes. I definitely agree with that. And I think following up on that, right, so I also agree, right, that it's also a love language. I think restorative justice, very much so. My wife is a restorative justice practitioner, so it's definitely a love language and something I've had to learn, right, so in one of the cases, right, that my wife had worked on, and this is just for a really brief example, there was a young man who had inappropriately touched a young woman, right? And in this current political climate, right, that is totally inexcusable. And that's something that we absolutely don't want to happen, right? Because we want to make sure that young women, young femme-identified folks can feel safe in their bodies, right, and can be safe wherever they go, right? Because I think safety for all of us, right, is critical. So when my wife facilitated the restorative justice circle, right, what she found out was that young man, had did that so that way he could hide his own identity of questioning his sexuality, right? He didn't want that to come out per se, so he did that to try to blend in with the boys, right? In what we would call, toxic masculinity, right? Yeah. So when she found that out, it's like, oh, okay, well, now that we understand that this is the thing, how can we help you be comfortable in yourself so that way you don't have to harm others? So that way we can heal collectively together. And with her working to help both of them heal, right? Like that helped to transform the relationship as well as help to, heal some of the harm, right? Now, I think there are two things with that. One, that is important, and that is the great work of the intervention side, right, to prevent this young man from going into the justice system. But I think to the point that was raised earlier, right, that's brought up from the Youth Justice Work Group, big shout out to the LA Youth Uprising Coalition for helping to lead that effort, right? What happens if there's a GSA on that campus? What happens if there is right, like a certain set of youth development right on that campus where young people can learn more about identity, can learn more about safety, can learn more about bodily autonomy, to where that doesn't happen at all, right? I think when we talk about, right, like this idea of providing these alternatives and providing, the intervention early, right, it prevents that situation from happening. Right. So I think those are the type of strategies that we absolutely need to invest in. And school is one mechanism, right, where we can make these strategies happen, in addition to working with some of the amazing community-based organizations that are doing this work on the ground level and with some really amazing young people. Great.
That is just fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to go now to questions from our audience. So if you're watching us live on Pasadena Media's Arroyo channel, you can't ask a question unless you sign into the Zoom. So registration for the Zoom is still open. Go to www.westernjustice.org/upcoming events, and you can sign up and then you can pose a question. If you are with us on Zoom already, we have a great group of people. You can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. It will give you an opportunity to either pose a question anonymously or to list your name. If you have a question that you want to pose to a specific panelist, go ahead and put that in your question. Now, I know we have some members of the Youth Justice Coalition with us today. And so I want to call on them first and see, is there any particular question that you would like to provide to the panel? The question that was being posed by members of the Youth Justice Coalition was that this past summer, 62-year-old Michael Thomas was shot in front of his home by the Lancaster Sheriff, a department that has had a long history of harassing and intimidating the low-income housing community members in Lancaster and Palmdale, a majority of whom are Black. He was unarmed, and the police report claimed that his disabled arm was reaching for a weapon he did not have. So the coalition members would like to know, Supervisor Barger, What are you willing to do to hold those who shot him accountable? And are you willing to support the work that is being done to defund the sheriff's department?
So I'll start with the first part of that question, and I appreciate the opportunity to connect with the coalition around this issue. In case you don't know, or if you do know, we currently have a settlement in place to address the historical issues that you noted up in the Antelope Valley, and we work with the monitors constantly to evaluate the police-community relations. I think one of the most frustrating things for me, and not only in the Antelope Valley, but also in central Los Angeles and East LA, transparency is not being played out as it relates to the sheriff's department. This board is united on holding the sheriff accountable as it relates to honoring the subpoena power that our COC has in play in order to get the answers necessary to be transparent and to get the full story and account in terms of what happened. It's not happening. And in the Antelope Valley, my frustration has been that it's carried over up there. There is a lack of trust. And quite frankly, there's a lack of trust by this board as it relates to the information that we're getting. The first time that I can remember as a county supervisor, we're doing an inquest on one of the shootings. That speaks volumes to what is going on right now as it relates to the relationship between this sheriff and all of the LA County residents. We are 5 members who represent 10 million people. And so we all have these questions. So my role is to continue to push and support Max Huntsman, who has been given the position to go out and be the Inspector General and question what is taking place and hold individuals accountable for any of the conduct that is taking place. And so I completely agree and feel that it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we're in a position where we are having this fight where we have to go to court in order to get the subpoena power issue resolved. Although I think that's going to take care of itself because the state has now put a legislation into play that's going to allow us to, in fact, have more teeth in the ability to do the subpoena power. As it relates to defunding law enforcement, I've said all along, to me, it's not an either or. I believe that we have to hold law enforcement accountable on an individual basis. And just like in politics, there are some bad seeds. There are bad seeds in law enforcement. And I firmly believe that they have no place wearing a uniform if they are not upholding and holding themselves to the standards that they're holding the community to. And we've seen that play out where it's been shown that there are those that are not carrying out the same standard as to what they expect the community to do. So for me, I'm not about defunding law enforcement, but I am about investing in the community. I believe that law enforcement does play a role. Early on, I was working, and one of the first things I did when I became a supervisor is to expand our mental evaluation team, because I do not believe law enforcement should play a role in engaging with people that are going through a crisis period. These individuals need someone who understands how to de-escalate and treat. And with the mental evaluation team, less than 1% of those that came in contact ended up going to jail. So 99% of the people that were called out, that the MET team had to go out and work with, didn't end up in our jail. Pre-mental evaluation team, they would have ended up in our jail and would have been another statistic, would have been recycled out back onto the street and then back into jail. And so, you know, I stand behind the fact that I do not support defunding, but please do not misconstrue that as being that I support the bad cops, because I don't. In fact, I believe that they need to be held equally as accountable. And so that's what we're going to work toward doing.
Great. Thank you, Supervisor Barger. One of the questions that we saw was the vast majority of children in foster care are children with emotional, intellectual, and other disabilities. What do you see as the essential next steps in serving these children? So that was one question that came out. We have another question from someone who is on a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. They would like to know if there are grants available to schools to pay for racial justice and implicit bias training for educators and staff. It's a great question. Also, we have a question, what are the plans for LA County camps that have been closed other than Challengers and Camp Gonzales? And we're getting more and more questions. It's just been fantastic. We also have someone who's an educator who said, for over 20 years, I've been an educator and have taken the Western Justice Center's conflict dispute resolution class. She feels that these schools should be part of the educational curriculum, at least at the middle school level, is not lower. How can these programs be recognized as vital to preventative education?
Clearly, we are reimagining what we are going to do with our camps. Some of them are not going to be repurposed because, quite frankly, they should be torn down. But when it comes to Challenger up in the Antelope Valley, we really do want this to be a restorative care place for everyone to come, but in particular the Antelope Valley. And I know that Supervisor Kuehl has been very active with her camps and how she's repurposing them. But not all the camps are going to be repurposed. There may be other uses for them within the county, or we may sell them. They're not ideally located in the greatest places. Many of them are very much out in the rural setting, as you talked about early on in terms of location. And so I think there are opportunities beyond just probation for the county to use these or tear them down and have them go away. But I know with my district, Challenger is my priority, and it's something that I view as an opportunity. We're working with the Broad group and also with a lot of the community groups to look at what is needed. I believe it's got to be a bottom-up approach. I don't want bureaucracy telling this office how we're going to do it. I want it to come from the community and be by the community, because it's going to be for the community. And I think that is an important thing that needs to take place in order for it to be a success.
Great, thank you. I want to throw two other questions on the board because I think they touched back into some of the things that we were talking about before. One is, will Measure J or other LA County funding sources be able to fund the expansion of having school-based LAUSD psychiatric social workers to provide mental health services and support services for all schools? And another LAUSD question, many youth across LA County cities are calling for school resource officers to be removed. Following the lead of LAUSD, do you have any advice for how smaller cities should approach these policy challenges? So I'm going to kick it to Mr. Turner or Judge Armstead. Maybe Judge Armstead, I see your mic is off. Let's go to you next.
I can address Measure J. So Measure J, there's a 17 body. I don't know if I said this earlier. So there will be a 17 body member body that will be making recommendations to the CEO, and then it will go before the board. The 17 member body there will be 5 appointees from the Board of Supervisors. We're asking them to submit their names by, I think, Friday, so that we can get them ready for the the last board hearing for this year. There will be 5 people with lived experience. And so lived experience, we're asking for people with juvenile, there needs to be at least one with juvenile lived experience, one with adult, and the other can be a combination, but adult lived experience or family members of people with juvenile or adult lived experience. There'll be 5 representatives from county departments and 2 representatives from labor. So this body will be part of conducting lots of sort of sessions through community members, organizations to kind of see what does the county want. It will be a huge body that we'll have to do within the first 4 months of next year. With those recommendations, they're going to prioritize where should funding go. So once they make those recommendations, then we'll put together sort of a list of priorities for the CEO to figure out how to work throughout our budget that will go before the board for a vote. So I cannot independently say where the money will go. It will be up to the community and those who serve to kind of make those recommendations. I hope that answers the question. I don't know if Supervisor wanted to add to that, but.
I think that that is correct, and the board is going to listen to what comes out of the group in making those recommendations. So it'll be more, I think, of a formality as it relates to allocating the resources.
And I just want to add that the application, if there's a person who's listening or knows someone with lived experience or family members with lived experience that want to be a part of it, the application goes live tomorrow morning, and it'll be open for 2 weeks. And that's where we'll be selecting the 5 people with lived experience, and it's on the CEO's website under ATI. So
great, thank you. I'm so glad that we're getting to broadcast those opportunities for people to get involved. David.
I know that earlier, especially when the pandemic first hit, I definitely want to shout out the supervisors for initiating. I think it was an additional $10 million to support local schools here in across Los Angeles, right? I think specifically in LAUSD and other parts as well. So I think one of the things, right, strategically that can be helpful, especially if we're thinking about, doing some cross collaboration. And I saw a question in the chat as well about like what the county can do youth development wise that can synchronize with cities. I think, one of the things that happens with larger bureaucracies is that there's a lot of siloing. And with this, right, like it can be particularly challenging, right, in order to synchronize some of the efforts that we know need to be synchronized in order to make things happen. So one of the ways and one of the mechanisms I think that we can think about is potentially developing MOUs, right, between county agencies, between local school districts, in order to not only begin to invest funds, but also too, right, like maybe there are some contract agreements that we can think about where people can share some resources, and those resources can then go to schools in the form of psychiatric social workers or things of that nature. And for the people who are on the call who may be wondering, okay, well, how is it that we, change relationships with law enforcement in our communities? How is it that we maybe begin to do that in some of the smaller cities or some of the smaller school districts? While I wouldn't want to, discuss broader organizing strategy, in such a public forum like this, I think the real question, right, is, what is the will of the people, especially those people who are the most impacted in your community, right? And then, if that will, right, is for, defunding or for, reallocating or whatever that will is for, I think working with those people and working with them closely, right? If they're Black folks, if they're systems impacted folks, I'll strongly encourage that you do that because I think that's one of the ways that you can make it happen. In addition to that, right, like, I know that there is also the LA County Office of Education, LACO, right? That's another place, right, that can be targeted strategically. If we want to think more broadly about how we can implement this at the countywide level. And then we can start thinking about state legislation as well, right? So there are all different types of organizing strategies we can take. I think what's going to matter is how effective they're going to be, and then how we'll be able to take them. We'll be more than happy to follow up. But you can look myself up online, innercitystruggle.org. Go to the staff, find my email, and we'll definitely be more than willing to engage. Outside of that, definitely appreciate this opportunity. And again, I think if we move closer towards cross collaboration between systems, especially between county, city, and school districts, I think we can really find that sweet spot to get the resources directly to the young people as quickly as possible.
That is fantastic. I think, there are some themes that I'm hearing come up on the course of this conversation. Like you said, David, cross collaboration, multi-agency coordination, prioritizing the voices and input of justice impacted communities. I also really appreciate our conversation that's addressing both the racial justice and the economic justice elements. Looking at sort of the economics of this and what opportunities and equity and access to those opportunities are we really pushing ourselves to provide to communities who have been disproportionately impacted by systemic racism. And also talking about prevention of that contact in the first place and looking at all the ways, whether it's use of mental health resource officers out in the field, whether it's working with restorative justice practitioners, people who are doing conflict resolution education or setting up peer mediation programs, all the ways that we can kind of get in front of this and break that connection from happening in the first place. We're down to about 4 minutes, and I just wanted to close with, and I hope it's not too hokey in a way, but I always like to end with, is there something that's giving you hope right now? This is a terrible year. We have seen just horror and grief and pain on so many levels, but also we have seen progress. So I'd love to just have a closing round of what is giving you hope right now. And if I can go to Judge Armstead first, if you'd be willing. I know you've always got hope in your pocket.
I was, let's first of all, thank you. I know this is my last second to say, but I just want to say thank you for the honor of being here and with the two distinguished guests that I was able to join. So thank you for all of that and the wisdom that everyone has shared. I'm finding hope that even in a time of crisis that people are banding together, we're figuring out what really matters again, and we're figuring out smarter ways to do things. So I'm finding lessons in the chaos and disorder. So that I'm finding hope.
I have to say the COVID has definitely created many challenges, but I'm finding hope in the fact that we've been able to move forward and not let COVID stop us in terms of what we need to do to get things done. And I would argue now more than ever, given the disruption it's having in our educational system, in our economy, as it relates to jobs, that it's more important now than ever to invest in our youth and invest in those that are coming in contact with our criminal system, because many of them, and I think Judge Armstead said it, it is not because we couldn't have prevented it. It's because we actually allowed it to happen. And so I think it's important for us now to really look at how we can ensure that people don't come in contact. And I have hope, because I know that we've got the best and the brightest, especially with Judge Armstead at the helm of getting it done. And I'm confident that as a board, with Holly Mitchell now as a new board member, we as 5 women, we don't take no for an answer.
To that I say amen, sister. And David.
The 5 little kings are 5 queens now. So yes, it is time for progress in LA. I think for me, one of the things that gives me hope and continues to give me hope is our young people. Our young people, a lot of whom have been, abandoned or betrayed by essentially every civic and social institution that they've come across. And they continue to work, continue to organize, continue to fight back. I'm inspired by a lot of the work of some of our partners. I say nobody goes down, right? Like some of the folks that we work with, like our team at YJC, like our team at COCO, like our team at Inner City Struggle, like the folks I work with at Black Lives Matter LA. Again, just some of the people who are incredibly inspirational and who drive not only the work, but drive me to do the work as well. So I'm definitely proud of them. And it gives me hope so that way we can create the change that we want to see. I don't want to raise, my children, God willing, I don't want to raise my kids in the same LA County I grew up in.
Amen. What's giving me hope is this conversation, the depth of it, the breadth of it, the passion behind the work that's gone into so many of the things that we've talked about today. And I just want to wrap and say how grateful I am to each of you. The Western Justice Center is doing conflict resolution education work in schools all around LA County, in Azusa, Linwood, Montebello, Norwalk, La Mirada, South LA, East LA. We're really proud. I know, David, we've been talking with you guys about being able to support your work in whatever way we can. Supervisor Barger, you've been just a resource and a sounding board to us from the start. And the incomparable Judge Armstead, we are very fortunate that Judge Armstead sits on the Western Justice Center's Program Advisory Council. And you joined us before the ATI happened, and we were just cheering when we heard, and that role could not have gone to a better person. Thank you all for being here today. We are so blessed to be in community with you. That's our hour, and everyone have a beautiful afternoon. And to anyone whose question we weren't able to get to, we're sorry, but hopefully we'll have more panels like this in the future. Thank you and have a great afternoon.